So thank you everyone for coming, and Sian and I are going to have a conversation about, prompted by the work really that you've probably all had a look at here in the exhibition. So Sian, it's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me to do this, and indeed for inviting me to take part in the show as well, giving me the opportunity to write that story, which I enjoyed writing. So now I remember when you first told me about this show, you told me that it wasn't a retrospective.
No.
At least I think that's what you told me. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
And yet when we look at the list of works, it goes back to 1992 and then 2001, 2003, etc., right up to the present day. So this is not meant to be a difficult question or a trick question, but if it's not a retrospective, what is it?
Well, thank you first. I'm going to answer that in a minute.
Yes,
but
like a politician.
Yes. Yeah. But first of all, I just so thrilled that you said yes when I just wrote to you and said, I've got this disparate body of work that I found in my cupboards.
So it's not even yours?
Well, it is mine.
Okay.
It is mine.
Okay.
But I hadn't looked at it for years,
Right.
and it was never meant to be shown together. And it was never meant to be any kind of retrospective either. But what it is it literally is just a kind of, I suppose it's not even a survey, because that sounds a very grand way to put it. I suppose it's more, it's literally, well, this is what I've done all this time, just examples of it. And they weren't even, one or two of them might be key pieces, but they weren't really, a lot of them. It was just, because some of them were, because some of them were framed nicely and mounted nicely. And it was like, for me, it was really helpful just to sort of fill this large space, but at the same time, have an idea of where I am now. So that's really how it happened. And then I contacted you because we'd worked together before and had a right laugh. And I really enjoyed, I've always found the mix of literature and, visuals together very, very exciting. And I just wanted to see what would happen.
Right.
By, asking you to do something quite random with these works, which I just emailed to you and said, can you do something with these? Just go ape. And that's what happened.
Well,
so.
I very much enjoyed it,
Yeah.
actually. You used a term there in that answer. You talked about key works. You said some of them are key works or something. How do you decide what is a key work? Is it just a feeling, or is it something that corresponds to certain criteria that you have? That sounded a bit poncy. No, absolutely not. That certainly wasn't why I mentioned it. It just, I just wondered if it was something that just came into your mind at that point, or if it's something that you think about in relation to your work.
I do. There's one or two things that I've done where they've actually either changed things or moved things on, or they've had a happy kind of situationing of them. And one of them, the one that I'm thinking of mostly, is the one that we used as the poster image, which is that ended up being purchased by the V&A, and so that one was quite special.
Yeah.
And I think things changed around that point. It was a bit of a pivotal moment.
How does something get purchased by the V&A? Do you send it in? Or do they get in touch with you because they've seen it somewhere? How does that happen?
This one happened through some coincidental things where I had gone to a large festival in Cornwall, and it would have been about 1998, something like, or 97, something like that, and it was called Festival of Light or something like that, and it was a lot of artworks, but they'd arranged for this 2-day kind of symposium and tour of the whole festival, which was all over Cornwall, and I signed up for it. It wasn't very expensive, and I thought, oh well, I'll go. I might learn something, and one of the speakers at the symposium was Mark Hayworth-Booth, who was at the time the senior curator of photographs at the V&A, and I didn't meet him that day, but we ended up sitting next to each other on the coach the next day when we were being toured around, and we just had a chat. And somebody just said, who was one of the organisers of it and knew me a bit, just said, Herbert's quite nice. And that's how it sort of started. So it was literally a conversation, and then it became, I was invited to, I was having a show, a solo show, my first, in Dorset, in Bridport, and I'd made a little catalogue for it, and Mark had just said, if you're doing anything, here's my card, let me know, you know. And it was that thing you do, you know, you just, if you're having a show, you send it to interested people. So I just sort of sent a note about it and said, would you like a catalogue? I can send you one. And, you know, it was like, yes, please send a catalogue. And then I got an email saying, a little while later, saying, we'd quite like to see what you've got. Do you want to come up and show us your portfolio? And so that's how it started.
That must have been quite exciting if you'd only just been mounting your first solo exhibition.
Yeah, it was.
Brilliant.
And quite scary, but they were so lovely there. And then nothing happened for about 2 years. They just said, thank you very much. We're going to sit on this for a bit. They just said, we've opened a drawer. So you're in the drawer. So I was like, ooh, I'm in the drawer.
Is that art speak for?
I don't know.
We've opened a drawer.
I was in the drawer.
Okay.
So and then literally on the morning of before 9/11.
Yeah.
So, you know, 9/11 happened at 3 p.m. over here. I remember that very well.
Yeah.
But in the morning, I got this email saying we would like to purchase this piece.
Brilliant.
And I was ecstatic, and I had some friends in New York, and I was busy emailing all these American friends, plus everyone I knew, and saying, this has just happened. And then I had to spend the rest of the afternoon apologising to them, because it was just bad timing.
Yeah.
So that's one thing I'll never forget.
Okay.
Yeah.
And why had you taken a picture of a jelly mould in the first place? It is a jelly mould, isn't it?
Well, there's one jelly mould there.
Okay. See, I can't turn all the way around.
No, there's this is the coaster.
Oh, it's that one. Okay,
yeah.
fine.
So, so I'll let you, we're supposed to use this on the table.
Oh, fine, thank you.
So the bottom one is a glass brioche dish.
Okay.
And then there's a kind of pudding dish.
Yeah.
And then there's a jelly mould.
Okay.
And then there's a kind of Dutch cake.
Yes.
Which I don't know what it's called. And then it's very past its by date custard tart.
Okay.
And then it's another Dutch cake on the top, which has got an unpronounceably bad to say name, which I'm not going to say because it's like very un-PC.
Oh, okay, I know what you're driving at. Yeah. And so what led you to, I know that you have this phrase that you've used, I don't know if phrase is even the right word, but you've described your work to me in the past as willful amateurism. Is this part of that, or is that something else entirely?
Oh no, this is part of it.
And could you tell us what it is? Briefly.
Briefly. Willful amateurism is like, it's a kind of a way of working and a way of, it's a way of working really that, it's a very difficult thing to say, Nick, without some notes, and I haven't.
Oh, is it?
No, it's quite. Well, I'll just say basically it's a lived experience. It comes out of Dada art movement, so it's very much an exercise in working with chance and the imagination and the absurd, and it's also elevating the kind of banal to and the everyday to calling it art, if you want. But doing that is a very willful thing to do because, it's kind of, who do you think you are doing that? And but also it's because I want to, and also because being an amateur, I'm reclaiming the word amateur as a positive thing, something to aspire to, because I'm anti-professional, although I'm not anti-professional in terms of respect to others, but I am anti-professional in terms of the things that, that sort of use of tripods.
Oh, okay.
It sounds a bit...
And yet you must have used tripods.
No.
What about the films that maybe we've seen in these marvellous grey boxes that your husband George made, I think?
No. Oh, yes, he did. He made those. Yeah. George made those. And the camera was on a tripod for that. I had to it took me 30 years to learn how to get the legs straight. So, but although some of them that I've done in the past, the cameras have been at quite a jaunty angle. Okay. So,
So is willful amateurism your term?
Yes.
Or, okay.
It's my term, and but I think there's a lot of willful amateurs knocking about. Yeah. And I would almost suggest that you could be one.
Well, you have in the past, and I didn't know how to take it.
Well, it was a compliment.
I took it as one.
Yeah.
But has anybody else adopted the term to describe themselves or their own work?
No, not really. Although I've got a friend that I'm working with at the moment who has started adopting the term willful for what she's doing. Okay. So it's creeping in.
She's halfway there.
Yeah. I don't think she would be particularly the sort of person that would call herself an amateur, because that is particularly willful, to do that. So, yeah. So she's not hardcore.
Okay.
Yeah.
So can we talk a bit about, more specifically about some of the photographs in this show? For instance, the two that I looked at first are the first two that we have over there, the two shots of roads. Now, I love those two images, and I became slightly, if you can be slightly obsessed with them, I became slightly obsessed with them when looking at all of the images from the show, because I was trying to work out where they might be.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I want you to tell me, because I like not knowing. But why did you take those pictures? What do they mean to you? If answering that requires you to tell us where they are, then fine.
No, I don't have to say.
Yeah.
They were, this is why it becomes sort of like the willful amateur stuff kicks in a little bit, because it's so everyday and banal and ordinary. I had 2 small children. They were both, I think one was about 1 and the other one was about 2. And I had started an evening class. This is a crazy story. I started an evening class in maths, GCSE, because I thought it would be a good idea to get a qualification, and I thought I could try and do teaching. And so I thought, well, I had English, but I didn't have maths because I was rubbish at it. And so I did this maths course, and one of the other students, we did it in the evening, she was a nanny and she was broke, and I didn't have any money either, but I did have some child benefit that was coming in. And I said to her one day, because I was desperate to just get out of the house, and you're not supposed to admit to that when you've got these young children, but I was desperate to get out. And so I just said to her, how much do you charge an hour? She said £5. And I said, oh, do you think you could do 2 hours a week nanny for me, or one afternoon? And she said, yes. So that's what happened on a Wednesday afternoon. And then everyone was a bit like, oh, do you think this is really what you should be spending your child benefit on? Shouldn't it go on the children? And I said, well, actually, it's benefiting the children because their mum is happy. Yeah. So I said, you know, it would not benefit them if I wasn't. Yeah. So, you know, I'm going to take that £10 and do that. And they had a nice time. But I literally would go I had 2 hours, so she'd come at 2 and I'd have to be back at 4. So Wednesday afternoons I just went out, and this is why I picked up a camera for the first time, as a, you know, to make work. I hadn't done that before. And I just sort of went to wherever was 20 minutes away. Right. And it was pouring with rain this one afternoon, and so I was at that first point. I got out and thought, oh, I'll take some pictures. I thought I'd better go and do some work, you know. And then I walked down. I think I must have walked. I don't think I drove. So I must have walked up there. So it was 20 minutes, half an hour's walk. And then I walked down to the bottom of the valley and saw the thing with the hedge, and took that picture. So these are those 2, the first 2 on the list. Yeah. One taken at 2 o'clock, the other at 3:15. Yeah, and then I had to turn around and go home. Right. But that was kind of, and then so I would do these things on a Wednesday afternoon. Right. And so that's the story of that. That's of that great. Picture. I like that story. And then we have the what I think of as the Rothko period. Can you tell us a bit about that? It's very complimentary that you said that. Thank you. Well, but those they started off being just their drawings. I mean, they're watercolours, but I wouldn't call them paintings. They're drawings as far as I'm concerned. So a drawing for me is like a thinking thing. Okay. And I'd been collecting colours that I'd seen when I was taking the kids to nursery or driving about, doing things, or walking anywhere. And I would see these strange colours in November time and February time that it was like just making myself see things. And I would pick out the colours in the roadsides, and then I'd put 2 of them together and make these kind of colour studies. Colour studies? I used the term colour field in the story that I wrote. Is that? That's very good. Is it? Yeah. Oh, thank you. I was impressed. Yeah. Okay. Well, another good answer. Thank you. And then we move on to these, which we've kind of talked about. So could you talk a little about the next series of images that are behind you? Yes. Which come out from this first one as well, which came from. Yes, because how it all started was that I had been using animal jelly moulds and animal biscuit cutters and things in the earlier work, which is not here at all. And everyone was saying, oh, there's a whole load of very nice jelly moulds. I bought this for you in the charity shop. And I collected people giving me jelly moulds and, you know, articles. And I was looking at them, and we had, at the same time, we had these Dutch friends that came over at the time of Princess Diana's funeral, and which sounds an odd thing to say in the middle of all this, but anyway. And they had invited us back to Holland, which none of us had ever been to before. And I had this ridiculous notion that Holland is flat, which is quite flat. And I just said, oh, these jelly moulds, now I look at them, they look a little bit like hills. I better, you know, go to Holland and put some hills there.
Okay.
So the series title became Putting Hills in Holland.
Okay.
And so that's how these all came about.
Right.
And the horizon line was very important in these things.
Right.
These ones were a bit later.
Yeah.
So these were, at the time, they were dealing with, there's quite a lot of serious stuff underpinning a lot of this that I don't really say very much about. But so I was quite concerned about land use. I was quite concerned about irradiation of food, and I was using food implements, and then at the same time these kind of articles from the kitchen, which were metallic and shiny, some of them, and some of them were plasticky and see-through-y, and one of them was a ceramic, and I just used to drive over there to Holland and stay with my friend and just find these spots to
and
just...
your car was full of these bits and pieces?
Yeah, just, you know, in his crates I'd take over. And I would just sort of, you know, bring a crate out with me in the middle of this waste ground and just pile them out and just try them out. And I had decided to use black and white film for these particular pictures because, and I'd kind of come up with the title as well beforehand, which was Gamma, and I wanted it to be this really irradiated black and white, as though these were kind of nuclear foods or something, and I wanted to get across this feeling of I suppose it was a bit like, read a lot of books about, you know, after the nuclear sort of science, lots of science fiction.
Okay.
So it was all about those sort of nuclear accidents and the world being turned into a terrible environment. And I thought, I'll do that with these things.
Okay.
And so, but the thing was that I kept all that very hidden, so that was the underpinning.
Yes.
And then in the darkroom, I had really worked to give them this kind of very cold tone to suggest heat, intense heat.
Right.
So it was like this sort of opposite.
Yeah.
I was very intrigued with this. I mean, I can talk about this now because I'd written about it much later.
Yeah.
For a study that I had to do, and it had all kind of come together. But at the time when I was making it, it was just following my nose, literally, and just seeing if it would work. Did seem to. But I didn't want them to be very big. I wanted them to be completely monumental and massive, but in a minute scale that would have this kind of intensity. So whether it has that or not, only the viewer can say, but it was, I had hoped that was what I was trying to convey with them.
Okay. What I in the story, I think, describe as humorous pictures of food, do they have any of this sort of weighty subtext to them?
Slightly, but not very.
Okay.
They were the food that I used. I got a lot of stick for making that work.
Right.
A lot of people
Who
said,
from?
people I didn't know,
Okay.
who would write to me or write in to wherever they were being shown and say, don't you think this is absolutely disgusting that you're wasting good food on
How do they know you
these
didn't eat
terrible
it
pictures?
after
Yeah, they
taking
didn't
the
know that.
picture?
No. It was no frills food. It was at a time when supermarkets were doing no frills food. They were just bringing in these things. And it was also to sort of test out whether this food was any good.
Yeah.
And it was absolutely horrible.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want to eat, and it used to smell really bad
Right.
as well.
Oh, sorry, I thought you meant that people giving you a hard time was horrible. You meant the food was horrible.
Oh, the food wasn't very nice either.
Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
and I just felt it was actually probably more useful to make art with it.
Right.
That piece over there
Yeah.
with the mashed potato and peas was specifically a little riposte to the National Trust,
Right.
because that's Durdle Door, and
Right.
and Durdle Door is copyright to the National Trust.
Is it?
Yeah, so you're not allowed to photograph it.
You're joking.
No, I'm not joking.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah, and a lot of these places are like that. That one is Stonehenge.
Yes.
And so that's made out of
Is it soldiers?
corned beef.
Oh, is it?
Yes.
Right.
And anyway, so I was doing all these, and that one is Burton Bradstock,
Right.
made out of pastry. But anyway, the Durdle Door one, I thought, well, that's, I can take a picture of mashed potato and peas Durdle Door, so that's all right. I'm allowed to. I'm not infringing any copyright with that. And I thought it was a perfectly good use for, kind of no frills smash, mashed potato, and tinned peas.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I used to do a similar thing. I'm not claiming it was anywhere near the level of your Durdle Door. When I had shepherd's pie. As a child, I'd have shepherd's pie and frozen peas, and I would sort of sculpt it before eating it.
Well, that's what I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I would always eat it.
Yeah, I think that's a really sensible thing to do with
Yeah.
your plate.
And if I'm honest, I do the same now.
Yeah, me too. In fact, I was, watching that film with the film of where he sculpts the mashed potato into the.
Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Yeah. Great
That was that was my favourite bit in the film.
Yeah.
'Cause
Tell us about the empty cardboard boxes,
Right.
which sounds like the beginning of a Monty Python sketch, doesn't it? I don't know, it reminds me of... anyway, never mind. Tell us about the empty cardboard boxes.
The empty cardboard boxes. Well, this was much later, so we've time travelled right through to 2017.
Yeah.
And I had sort of six years earlier had a fellowship at the British School at Rome, which is where they have these lovely studios, and you can be in there for 3 months and get given a stipend, and so that was thrilling and a really wonderful time. And then once you've done that, you are allowed to apply to go back in the summer months when it's boiling hot and no one wants to be there. And they'll charge you a fixed rate, but it's not very much, for studio and accommodation, which is all in. And then, and you have to apply to the director. So I applied and got back there in 2014, and then I applied again 3 years later and went in 2017. And by this time, I had quite a lot of time had elapsed since the first time I was there, and I had made some decisions about how I wanted to work, which was, I just want to work with this space I've been given, and I'm not bringing because I've always taken props with me wherever I went, I'm not taking props with me. I will find things that are already there, and I'm just going to work with what's there, and in a very ad hoc kind of way, and make something out of rubbish or nothing or what's there, and see if I can do that. And so I just found all these cardboard boxes in the rubbish store, and you know, put them all together again, and made this sort of floor piece sculpture, which is my background was sculpture, so and I hadn't really made proper what I would consider to be a sculpture in many years. You know, I just used to make things or put things together in front of the camera because I wanted to see what would happen, and also wanted to see why the camera would make me do it. It's like, well, what does it look like on a once removed print, you know, as a picture? Because if I made it, I knew that if I left it there, it would fall down. So anyway, so these things were quite short-term sculptural situations, and that's just one of them, sort of a whole load. And I was doing these videos as well.
Yes, tell us about the videos, and perhaps do you work very differently, and how do you know when a project is more likely to lend itself to video than to still photography?
Yes, well, I think I kind of tried both out at the same time, and then you'd realise that, I mean, still photographs worked up to a point, but then, particularly with this sheet throwing piece, it made so much more sense as a video. They started off, the whole thing started off with a video that I haven't shown, which I could have shown, and it would have been a very obvious one to do, but I just thought, no, I'm not going to do that. Which was to do with the fact that it was so hot. It was about 40 degrees, boiling hot, very humid as well. And I had this orange IKEA chair in the space, and it was orangey red, bless you. And I used to just like looking at it because it orange looked great on this grey floor. So I just used to have it in the middle of the floor, and also I'd use it to dry my towel on, because you'd have to shower 3 times a day just to sort of stay cool, and you'd have a cool shower 3 times a day, and you know. But the thing was that the towel never dried off because it was too humid. So I would put the towel on the chair and open the windows and open the door and get a through draft and try and dry it off a bit. And you only got a clean towel once a week because it's a bit like being in a monastery, I think, there. And so this towel had to last. And anyway, one of the other artists who was there in the other studio just walked in, because we were always walking in and out of each other's spaces, and said, "Oh, that looks interesting. Is that a piece of work?" And I said, "No, but it could be." Yeah. And then I just set up the film camera and started throwing the towel at the chair to see if I could get it to land on the chair. And it did that twice. Yeah. And then the third time it landed on the floor. Yeah. And those were the 3 films that I had. And then I suddenly realised, because I knew my art history, that Marcel Duchamp, who was a Dada artist, had done something called 3 standard stoppages, where he had dropped a piece of string, the same length of string, onto a painted surface, and then looked at the shape of the string afterwards, and then, you know, so it was kind of a reworking using ordinary things of 3 standard stoppages, and also not, you know, and then that became the sort of starting point for how the boxes all started working as well. Don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, very, very well. As well as being so I take it then you're a fan of Dada.
I'm a fan of Dada, but I wasn't much of a fan of Duchamp.
Oh, okay.
No, because I think he wasn't a very nice man.
Oh, well, that's an interesting... I didn't know that, but... right, I don't like him anymore then.
No, that's the right, yeah.
Okay. What about surrealism? How do you feel about surrealism? Because I always think of Dada and surrealism as very close,
Yeah,
but different.
they are close, but they're different in that one is younger than the other.
Yeah,
So the surrealism is younger.
yeah.
They are close. But I suppose there's a bit more... Well, I suppose they're close because with Dada it was very much a sort of, you know, you would just do something.
Yeah.
And with surrealism, you'd just kind of do something, but it had more of a meaning to it,
Okay.
which was imposed afterwards, and it was like the poetics was imposed.
Okay.
Whereas with Dada, it was more...
By Breton, for example.
Yeah, nihilistic.
Okay.
So it would be... And more absurd.
Okay.
So they're like... They took themselves very seriously, those surrealists, didn't they?
Yes, yes, they
Yeah.
did. Can I ask you a very crass... You'll probably think it's a very crass question.
I can't imagine you'd ask me a crass question.
Well, who's your favourite artist?
That is... Well, I've got lots of favourite artists.
Okay, give
So
us three.
Okay. My most favourite artist is Piero della Francesca.
Okay.
And yeah, I'll just say that.
You see, it was so easy.
It was
after that.
actually, yeah.
Has anybody got any questions, please? More intelligent ones than mine. Wouldn't be hard. Yes, Tim.
What cameras have you used over the years?
Oh, I've only used about 3. So that was made on a Nikon FM.
With a 50mm lens or
A what?
with a 50mm lens or what
Yes,
sort of lens?
50mm lens. And that was made with a Pentax 7.5? So is that right? I'm not very good at cameras. 6.7, that's the one. Who said that? Thanks, George. Pentax 6.7. I did use a Bronica 645 for a while, but with the Pentax and the Bronica, I had to put prisms on because I got very confused with the upside down and back to front that you get in those, and it made me go completely doolally.
And the format too, because they're square, aren't
No, mine
Is
were
it the Bronica
645.
they? Oh, right.
Yeah, so it's slightly off the square.
Yeah.
The most recent stuff was done with a Canon 5D Mark II, which makes me sound really technical. So,
Good question, Tim.
but I couldn't tell you what lenses they were. They were quite big.
You don't change the lenses then?
Oh no. And I just set it on.
That's on the camera.
I set it on automatic, and it's absolutely like, you know. And I taught photography for many years. Yeah. It's the most,
so easy.
well, actually, it's not easy, but it's just point and press takes out a lot of the aggro.
Mm.
You know, I was more interested in content.
We had another question here.
On that note, can you say a little bit more about why it's called Mad and Tame?
Oh, very good question,
Ooh,
which I had on my mental list and I'd forgotten
Yeah.
it. Thank you.
it comes from. Ooh, is it on the thing? It comes from this quote by Roland Barthes, which is at the top of the sheet. Do you want me to read it out? Or should I just talk about it?
Whichever you prefer.
Well, I didn't say before about this, so one of the reasons why the work changed quite dramatically over there was because after I'd gone to Rome the first time, and you know this, after I'd gone to Rome the first time, I'd made a body of work that I absolutely had no idea what I had done or even why I had done it. And I found it terrifying that I couldn't explain it and also discuss it or even understand it. And it wasn't because it was any good or anything like that. It was because I'd moved somewhere without my brain catching up. And I decided to do a PhD, which was a bit of a reckless thing. And I did it in a year. And it was a retrospective. And that's how I ended up looking at all this early stuff again. And it began to start making sense that I hadn't moved very far from the beginning, which was actually really heartening to know. So,
Why was that happening?
well, because you just realise that you must have been on the right path from the very start.
Okay.
So it was like, that felt good, even though, and then also by the time that, because there'd been like 40 years, 30 to 40 years gap between those 2 points, had gained life experience, or whatever you want to call it, bit of knowledge possibly, to understand where I had ended up a bit more by that point. But it took doing the wretched PhD to get there, and it was the kind of best and worst thing I've ever done. And in the middle of it all, I'd never looked at theory ever. I'd avoided it like the plague. And also I was very scathing about it. If anyone said anything, I would be going like, "Pah, don't talk to me about theory." And Roland Barthes, it was like, I don't read that stuff, And I couldn't read it because it used to make me go to sleep. And anyway, I had to force myself to read it, to do this thing, and it was hell. And I loved literature, and I would read and read and read literature all the time. And then when I did that wretched PhD, I lost the skill of reading literature and enjoying it, and got to a point where all I could read was, I was going to say something very rude, that word, theory. And training myself up to read, you helped, because I read one of your books, and I read that all the way through without stopping, and I really enjoyed it. So I like your writing.
Oh,
so
good,
yeah, so which is why I asked you to work with me. But it was, so that, but the thing was that I did actually start to fall in love with what Barthes said. And this particular little quote, which is on this sheet, which I won't go into huge amounts, but this is just one bit of it. He talks at the beginning of this paragraph, which says, "Mad or tame, photography can be one or the other." And it was all about sort of the craziness of looking, the craziness of memory, and how photography can be this conduit to all these different emotions and feelings that you don't kind of realise. And also to do with kind of understanding the mechanism of what's going on with, what is happening in that space inside the camera. So for me, it became this literally mad or tame. It's upside down. I said to you, it's upside down, back to front, and it made me do lally. And then it made me do lally in a different kind of way, because my imagination went wild. And I would be imagining all these worlds that were inside this box that was the camera. And that's how these boxes that George made for me came about as well. So, don't know if that helps.
Thanks for the question. Do we have another question?
Oh,
Yes.
I was just interested to hear you talking more about the beginning. So kind of going from the decision to do something very useful, a maths GCSE, in order to try and get a teaching job. That took you to just pursuing time on your own with the camera for the first time. I'm interested in your kind of intuition in taking up the camera for the first time to make art, as you said, or something along those lines. And kind of what the very beginning, the development from the very beginning was, and your connection to that experience of having young children and taking time away, and particularly particular amount of time and a particular set of parameters, like a distance from home. And yeah, could you just talk a little bit more about
Oh yeah. Well, the camera was part of that because I didn't have a studio, and so I kind of, without realising it, looking back, you know, and certainly from that retrospective viewpoint, the studio was inside that camera space. So I took it out with me. So it was like, and then the studio became wherever I imagined that would make me take the picture. So those spaces are closed off. They're box-like. They're occluded views. You can't see beyond because fog's there or the road turns and there's a hedge there. So someone can enter stage right or left, and they can sort of stand in the middle and leave again. So there's stage that, I mean, I haven't mentioned about the fact that I had a background in interest in theatre, and I was a theatre production photographer before many years right at the beginning. So I'd used a camera for work things professionally, but I hadn't ever used it to make work with, other than it was always a recording device. And then suddenly it became a mechanism to enter a different world, and my imaginative world that took me away from the family and the children and the domestic, which, you know, I loved it and I hated it. You know, it was like Mad or Tame. You know, it was either wonderful or awful, and it was kind of like, I've got to embrace this in some way. And the camera was speedy, so I had to be fast because there was only a finite amount of time, 2 hours a week at the beginning. So the camera was the best way to do it. And then at the same time, I mean, George was brilliant, built me a dark room in the garage, and so we had this, you know, he had a bit of workshop space in there, and I had this dark room that was not horizontal but vertical, so like all the trays were on top of each other, and it kind of worked. We didn't want to go there at night, you know, after tea, once the boys were in bed, and, you know, produce these things. Those were slide films. But it, you know, so the camera became this mechanism for the imagination to flourish or to exist actually, not flourish. It just had to exist. And but I could never have said any of this when I was making them.
Thank you very much. This prompts me to ask one final question perhaps, which is, your two boys, who you just mentioned, grew up in a home with two artists, and I wonder if either of them has shown any inclination to follow their parents into art.
Not visually, but I think one of them has got his own band, so it's been music. With both of them, it was music and writing.
Right.
So the elder one wrote amazing. He was a very good writer of fiction and other things, but he didn't pursue it, which I'm quite sad about.
Right.
And but he's now writing code, which he sees as, you know, quite creative as well. Yeah. And he's very good at it. So, and he sees that as puzzles and problem solving. So it's still a creative outlet. And the other one started off as a technical theatre producer, and then so he works as a technician at Falmouth University, and he's also in this band called Bobby Funk. If ever you feel like a bit of hardcore punk, it's very loud, and he writes all the songs, he writes all the lyrics.
Okay, Bobby Funk.
Bobby Funk.
Okay.
They're very good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sian, and thank you all very much for listening and for your questions. And thank you, Kelly and 9A Projects, for hosting us. Thank you.
Yeah.